When World War II was declared, I felt very patriotic and I wanted to join too. I was working at the Princess Theater as I sold popcorn and candy in the concession stand. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We heard that Pearl Harbor had been attacked, and everybody was very angry, and we wanted to sign up and go go get the Japs. Everybody. The next Monday morning, they were down at the recruiting offices and joined the Army and Navy, Marine Corps. But as I found out in a few days that I was much too young, that I had to wait. So I just returned to high school and until I was a senior. In February of 1944, I joined the Naval Reserve with the intention of going into the Navy as soon as I graduated from high school. Got out of school early. They allowed us to leave early and we could still graduate. And my parents allowed me to, they signed my papers so I could go in before I was 18. I was still 17 when I went in. So I left on May 15th for Great Lakes Naval Station in Chicago. And I was up there for 5 weeks for boot training. I think there was about 120 of us to a company, and we were assigned to a barracks. And there was a chief, and I think he had 2 or 3 petty officers. They were in charge of our company. And first couple of days we got oriented. They assigned us uniforms. We shipped all of our civilian clothes back home. And then we started our training. Every morning we'd have to get up at a certain time. And then we'd go to breakfast. We had a march as a company. We'd fall out and they'd have roll call. And then we went over to what they called the grinder, which was just an open field. And we ran for 3 miles. And then we came back and we went to breakfast. And then sometimes we went to class to learn Navy tradition. And then they drilled us in how to walk and march in formation. They taught us discipline and to do whatever we were told without questioning it. They gave us 10 days leave, and we came on a train and came home to St. Louis for 10 days. And then after the 10 days were up, we got back on the train, went back up to Great Lakes. And instead of going to our boot camp barracks, they assigned us to another area, which was we were being shipped to other areas or wherever we were needed. It was kind of like a staging area. I was supposed to go to electrical school. We were interviewed while we were in boot camp, and since I had gone to trade school in high school, I was qualified to be an electrician, and I had training, 3 years of training. But when I got back to Chicago, my orders were changed, and I didn't go to electrical school. They put us on a train and shipped us out to California. I went to Long Beach, California, to a staging area. It was a new constructed base. It wasn't finished, but they didn't have any place else to put us, so we were on this base without the buildings were there, but they didn't have any heat, didn't have any mattresses or bunks. We were just there, and we had to sleep fully dressed with our overcoats on. And they had bunks there, but didn't have any mattresses on them. So we laid down on. They had boards as springs, so we laid on them and whenever we could sleep. And then after I think 5 or 6 days, we got assigned to a cargo ship as a passenger. It was a marine, not marine, but a merchant marine uh, cargo ship, and they were taking cargo to Pearl Harbor. And I think there was about a dozen of us who were assigned to this merchant ship, and they took us from Long Beach, California, to Pearl Harbor. I think it took us at least 10 days. And at night, the ship was blacked out, so if you went out on the deck, you couldn't see anything. And you'd have to stand out there for a while because everything was pitch black. But after a while, you could see the stars, and it was just a big carpet of stars. Just never saw so many stars. The sea was fairly moderate, but we still had trouble walking because we didn't have our sea legs. We'd kind of stagger around. The Merchant Marine had good bunks. We thought, well, this is all right if this is the way the Navy is, because we didn't have bunks that, like regular Navy does, that they had mattresses that were 4 or 5 inches thick. We slept one or two to bunks. Later on, when I was on a troop ship, we had, I think, 4 and 5 guys right stacked up. You didn't get any mattress. They were just on the whatever the bunk was made of. Just a canvas with rope tied. And after about 10 days, we got to Pearl Harbor, and they unloaded us and put us on a bus. Hawaii was really nice. We got there in, I think it was August or early September of 44, and we were in this staging area called Aiea, which was a big naval base for the Navy, maybe a naval hospital for the Navy and Marines that were hurt in combat or anywhere. This was also the staging area for the whole Pacific Ocean. If they needed people on ships, they went to this area and got the people they needed. Every day you had a different job. Some days you were put in a mess hall and you'd be what they call a mess cook. You served on the line, serving the food to the people going through. You had to feed everybody every day, 3 times a day. You had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but you never had to do that every day. Some days you were put on work parties, and you go to office buildings and you help clean the buildings. One time they put us on a truck and guys started jumping off. So I thought, well, I'll just jump off too. And the next day they called the same guys, put them on a truck, and put an armed guard with a pistol. And the chief come out and he says, now if any of these guys jump off of this truck, I want you to shoot them. So they took us out into the graveyard where Marines or sailors that had died, and they needed to bury them. And we had to dig a hole when we came back after I think we worked all day, and before they let us go home, go back to the barracks. And all of us were just covered with the dirt out there was red. It was real red dirt. And all you could see was their eyes and their mouth. They were just covered with this dirt. We never jumped off any trucks anymore. You met, were friends with a lot of people. You know, I don't remember any of them. We weren't together very long, and most of the time it was most of the time you just learned their first name. If you met and knew them today, they'd be gone tomorrow. So I must have been there at least 2 months, and then they put us on a truck and took us to the other side of the island. To it was right on Pearl Harbor entrance. It was a place called Iroquois Point. We did basically the same thing that we did over at IEA. You'd work a day, and then you'd be off a day, and you could do whatever you want. You could go into Honolulu or Waikiki Beach, or go across the island and go swimming, or you could do whatever you wanted as long as you were back by 5 o'clock. People on the island, I guess they adjusted to it, but they didn't like us very much. They were courteous most of the time, but some of them were obnoxious. They were sick of seeing us everywhere because we would take up all of their movie seats and take up all their buses, and we take up all their restaurants. And we'd be down on the beach. We took around all swimming in the Waikiki Beach or one of the other ones. When we went into Honolulu, we'd have to walk down to the harbor, and then they had a boat that took us across the harbor to the other side, and there we caught a bus. And we go past Hickam Field, which was Army Air Force Base, and into Honolulu. Well, one time we just wanted to get back by 5 o'clock. Tried to catch a bus back, and all the buses were full. So they put us on report. And the next day, they had to do what they called a captain's mass. You had to go up in front of an officer and tell him why you were late. And he didn't want to believe you because he had work parties. So all of us that were late, we went to work at midnight unloading ships. We had to go down in the harbor and unload these big cargo ships, and work from midnight till 8 in the morning unloading ships. That went on for a week. That was my punishment for being late. Iroquois Point was the name of the base, and it was amphibious. And this is where all of the people that participated in invasions were. This was our home base. So whenever they needed somebody for fill one of the units that was going on in the invasion, and this is where they got their personnel. That's how they got me. They taught us how to drive these boats, these landing craft, and they taught us how to semaphore and Morse code with the blinkers. They taught us all of the things we needed to help. This was what they called the beach masters. We landed with the Marines and the Army with the first and second and third waves, and then we stopped at the beach, and then we directed traffic in. When the LSTs and the landing craft come in, you would direct the traffic to where you were needed. The different stuff was needed. And I guess I was with them about 3 or 4 months before we left to go to Okinawa. They put us on a ship, and with a bunch of Marines and a bunch of Army, And we started out. And first, we went south, I think, to the Christmas Islands. And then we went down to the Marshall Islands. I'm not doing anything. We're just playing pinochle and we're playing hearts and cribbage. Oh, we were just hip hopping, getting in position for when we get to when they needed us on Okinawa. We had uh, destroyers and oh, I guess there were at least 3 or 4 transports with us. With destroyers, we'd be spread out. We'd sit and we'd watch the other ships and the semaphore, and we'd practice our semaphore when they would signal the ships. We could read the messages, uh, so we knew pretty well what was going on. Sometimes we were close enough where they'd use the flags, A, B, C, D, E, and you spell it out, spell the words out with the flags. Yeah, I was good at it.
You remember it still?
Probably some of it. I could, some of it. When we got to the Gilbert Islands, we had crossed the equator, and they told us that they were going to be initiated into the shellbacks. We would have to run the gauntlet of the shellbacks, and it wasn't a very big initiation because there really wasn't many shellbacks on board. Everybody was polywogs. Polywog was what you were before you were initiated. They turned the hose on us with salt water and soaked us down. The guys that were shellbacks, they had paddles and they swatted us a couple times. And then we had to go up and kiss the baby's belly. He was a big, heavy set fellow, and he was sitting there with a. He didn't have much clothes on. This is his underwear, I think, and a pair of shoes. After he did that, then they dumped you in a big tub of water, and they held your head down, and they'd say, "What are you?" Up until that point, you were supposed to say, "I'm a lowly polywog." And after second or third dumping, you'd say, "Well, I'm a shellback." Right, out. So then that was it. And from there, we went over to the Marianas, uh, which is Guam and Saipan. And then we went up to Palau. From there, we went to the Philippines, went to Leyte and Samar. There was a lot of fighting still going on Leyte and Samar and Mindanao and Manila. They were all there was still a lot of combat going on, but we didn't see any. They put us on shore uh, for a couple of weeks. We had what they call it native boys that cleaned our tents. We had to live in a tent for 4 guys that lived in a tent together, and we had these island boys. They would clean it up, clean our area, our tents. Well, our tent boy, he took us up to his village. I think they were called Igorots, the natives. And while they were up there, they wanted to feed us food, but we didn't think it was a good idea because they had what they called a yellow-haired dog. It was a delicacy for them. They had one on a spit, and they wanted us to eat this dog. Anyway, we weren't that hungry. We thought we was going to go to Iwo Jima, but for some reason they canceled us. Uh, I think our ship was late coming to pick us up. After we got on the ship, we ran. We was on our way to Okinawa. They were briefing us on what to expect. They thought we'd have the same situation that they met at Iwo, where they had a big fight to get on land. We ran into a big storm. I think it was a typhoon, because the ship, I'd never rode on a ship that was that bad. That's where we got thrown out of our bunks. The ship would be picked up and it would just shake like the propeller came out of the water, and it would rotate, and that would cause the ship to vibrate. We didn't think we was going to survive the storm because it was that bad. We got guys were flying out of their bunks. Anyway, we finally got to Okinawa, and after Iwo Jima, the Navy, I don't know who planned it or what, but they shelled the whole island, the southern end of the island, and the ships congregated like there was going to be an invasion on the southern end of the island. And this pulled all of the Japanese soldiers all the way down. They were going to meet us at the beach and have a big massacre. They were going to massacre us if we got to the beach. But we landed on the west side on April the 1st, and it was Easter Sunday in 1945. And there was a reef that stuck out on the end of the island, a couple hundred yards. Anyway, we had to walk through knee deep water into the beach, and I was shot fired. We started out running, trying to run in water with full pack, and we were loaded down pretty well. Anyway, after about 50 feet, we started walking because nobody was shooting at us. That's why I always say that's my best April Fool's joke, because we tricked the Japanese into thinking we were going to land on the southern end, and we landed on the west. And instead of getting shot at, we walked ashore. Never had a shot fired at us. We didn't go inland with the Marines and the Army. We just stopped right at the beach, and we started setting up our towers and our areas to direct traffic. The wounded came in here, and we loaded them on these landing craft, and they took them out to the hospital ship. And medical supplies came in on our beach. It was going to be a staging area for our invasion of Japan. It was also a place for our planes to land. Naha was the capital, and that was only about 10 miles away. So I guess we were about that close to them. But the Japanese, they had a way of where they practiced tunneling into the hills, and they had a network of tunnels and caves where they could defend the island and be safe from bombing and shelling. During the day, we could capture Naha, and then because of this tunneling and caves, we would lose it at night. So this went on for several weeks. Artillery was set up right behind our base, and they would fire shells into those caves. They went round the clock. Big guns, they would continually shooting. It wasn't easy to sleep when they were going. Navy they would come in with their, and the Army too, I guess. They try to skip bombs into these caves. They just let them bounce off the ground and get into the caves because they couldn't bomb them from above. But once in a while, the planes came too low, and then these shells from the Army, they would hit these planes while they were skip bombing. So we lost some planes that way. We would have air raids. The Japanese would come down and they would bomb the beaches, and they'd try to hit the ships. There was supposed to be 1,000 ships out there on around our beach with troops and supplies. We'd have to start up what they call a smoke machine, and that would help cover the beach and the ships out there in the ocean. We have these what they call smoke pots. Whenever we had an air raid, we'd have to run from our area up and start these machines and get them making smoke. You could see the mast on the ship, but you couldn't see the ship. It was smoke covering them pretty well. And all the ships had boats too with these smoke machines on them. So that helped the planes. They couldn't find anything to bomb or shoot. There were the kamikazes. We had kamikazes too. I saw several ships get hit by kamikazes. The cruiser um, was just off our beach, and we could see this was coming down like this, spiraling down, and picked out the cruiser, and he plowed into it. At night, it was just beautiful. You never saw Fourth of July uh, celebrations like you saw when we had air raids. You could They had these big spotlights that they would shine up in the air, and they would pick out an airplane maybe a couple miles up, and it's amazing that they would find them. But then all of these big guns would start shooting at it, and all of the guns with tracers, they would start shooting at it. It was beautiful, but at the same time, all of the shrapnel was coming down on us because it exploded up on top, and then it would have to come down. So we we'd have to build our foxholes so that we could see out, but when the stuff came down, it didn't land on top of us. Wow. Yeah, the first couple of weeks it was air raids all night. Gradually they stopped. Maybe once in a while we get one. I think they shot all the planes down. After a while, we built an area where we had uh, wood floors. The first couple of weeks we just had dirt floors under our tents. We accumulated wood enough we could build wood floors because we had a lot of rain real hard. We had one typhoon, and it lifted some of the smaller ships out of the water and brought them up on the beach. And it was kind of miserable when it was raining, and it was still pretty cold because it was April. We saw a lot of Japanese, but we didn't have any reason to use our rifles. These were civilians or captured prisoners that were in prisoner of war camps at big barbed wire areas. Most of them were displaced, and they'd be walking along the road, and sometimes we'd pick them up and take them to these areas where they had food and lodging for them. We were there for 82 days. They told us to take our personal gear and get on a truck, and they took us out, put us on the boat, put us on the ship, and took us back to Pearl Harbor. And while we were, when we got back, they gave us a week R&R in Waikiki Beach at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. We lived right on the Waikiki Beach for a whole week, but we had to still be inside at 5 o'clock. We didn't have much leeway at nightlife anyway. But we did get to go to the restaurants, and we had when you're in a restaurant, even though you're underage, you could order beer. We could buy beer. We liked P.Y. Chong's. It was a Chinese place. It's the first time I ever had French fried oysters, and beer. And I thought that was great. We were earning $54 a month. We had a lot of money.
Pretty good for the
That
family.
was spending money, yeah.
Good.
After our R&R in Waikiki Beach, they went back to Iroquois Point, and they gave us uh, our winter gear to go to Japan the day that they dropped the first atomic bomb. And then a week later, they dropped the second bomb. And then the Japanese surrendered. And we had a huge celebration. We was in Pearl Harbor, and I think it's every ship we had. They had these emergency flares that they all shoot when we have trouble. Anyway, I think every ship shot everyone they had. Anyway, it was 4th of July over Pearl Harbor when the Japanese surrendered. But I think within a couple of days we were on a ship headed for Japan, and got to Japan and landed at Sasebo. I think they mentioned that we would be working uh, rebuilding one of the harbors. Um, I think that's what they said. It wasn't clear what we were going to do. It's just that we were part of the planning for the invasion, so they sent us even though the war was over.
What was that feeling? How did that feel like not having to
Well,
worry
I
about?
felt good, but when we got there, we took our rifles with us. Yeah, we kept our rifles with us for long couple weeks, and we gradually stopped carrying them around. We had pistols too. We wore our pistols for a while, and then we stopped using them too.
How did the civilians react to American troops?
Well, they just more or less ignored us at the beginning, and then uh, they started trading with us because they didn't have any food. They were our submarines had cut off all of their food supply because they didn't have much area there. Japan is a very small island, and they have as much they have population that really they couldn't feed themselves. They had to get their food from, say, from China or Philippines or wherever. Anyway, when they would farm, they would have levels. They would go up a hill and flatten off this hill, and just where they could put in rice or vegetables or something. That's the way they farmed. We could see the soldiers walking. They would had full packs, no rifles, but they had full packs. They'd be walking down the road like they're going home. Yeah, they didn't cause any problems at all. And
Yes.
after we landed at Sasebo, they put us on this LST and shipped us down to Nagasaki. The first day we didn't know we was in Nagasaki. There wasn't anything there. Yeah, and I think it was the next day they took us over to where the bomb landed, and you could look in all directions, and there wasn't anything there except a pile of bricks or a streetcar that was turned over and it was burned out. We saw some steel buildings that the girders were all twisted, and I thought, wow, that was some bomb. Yeah, we had no idea that there was such a thing. I was amazed. I didn't I didn't have any idea uh, that such damage could be done. We got to Japan, uh, Tokyo, whole city blocks oh for maybe a half mile were just devastated. There wasn't no buildings or anything. you could still see a lot of bricks and a lot of wood and everything. But in Nagasaki, it wasn't anything to see. They dropped one bomb and it wiped out a whole city. It was most unusual. But we were glad to hear it because that meant that uh, the war was almost over. We would think that it would be almost over. We thought the Japs would. We thought the Japs would surrender when uh, they saw the devastation of one bomb, but they didn't do it. We had to drop a second one, showing that we had enough that we could probably devastate the whole city, the whole island. And, and it wasn't after this second bomb, then the emperor decided that it was time to surrender unconditionally. They dropped the bomb in August. We got there, I think, the 14th of September. They had just signed the peace treaty. It's hard to keep track of that.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Anyway, within 2 weeks, they put us on a train and shipped us across the island to Fukuoka and Kokura, two seaport towns. They were real close to each other, and that's where we stayed. We had a ball. Uh, we were the only Navy there. We for a couple of weeks. We go into town and we just did about whatever we wanted to. We went into town, and if you missed the truck coming back, then you had to walk back. And this farmer, every night, every evening, somebody would swipe his horse and they'd ride it back to camp. So every morning he'd come out to our base and get his horse and take it back. And we got to know some of the fishermen, and they would bring clams in. Some of the guys that knew how to do it, they built a great big fire in the sand on the beach and built a great big fire, and then they put clams on top of it. And it was whenever the clams would pop open, and we'd have a clam bake. They had mine layers come in, they cleaned the harbor out, but they had planes that dropped mines in after get the mines out of there. And we brought in lumber and stuff, and we built docks, and well, just more or less got things ready so that they could use the harbor again. We got back to Pearl Harbor, and they broke our unit up, and they sent us all back to IE again. And I didn't have any regular Navy clothes. I had just the battle greens. We had a green uniform when I was in the Beach Masters. Anyway, I think I was there about a week, and they put me on a destroyer. About four of us from the Beach Masters got assigned to this destroyer. It just came out, just been built on the East Coast, up in Bath, Maine, called the Herbert J. Thomas. That's the only ship I remember. This is the only ship I was assigned to in all the time I was in the Navy. We were sitting on the deck. We had just gotten there, and our captain came by and was executive officer. And the Beachmasters were more or less a relaxed area. And on the ship, whenever the captain came by, everybody was just supposed to stand and salute or stand at attention. And we just sat there like we we'd forgot what we were supposed to do. Anyway, executive officer came over and he jumped on one of the guys and he says, "You know, you're supposed to stand at attention when the captain goes by." And the guy said, Well, I'm sorry. We're used to drinking beer with our captain. Uh, so he smiled a little bit and he says, "Well, you're not where you were before. You're on a naval ship and you will do this and you will do that." "Yes, sir." And he says, "Where are your uniforms?" He says, "This is all we got." So he took us down and we had to buy all new uniforms and throw our other green uniforms away.
How long did you get acclimated to the new way of doing things?
Wasn't long. Probably the next day we were assigned to different outfits. I was put in the engine room gang below the deck. That was since I had electrical experience. I was a fireman. I was assigned to the electrical department. A day or so later, we went over to the big island of Hawaii. The next day, we left for Tokyo. We got Tokyo right before Christmas. The PA system says, "Anybody want to go to church on Christmas?" And I said, "Yeah." So it was pouring down raining. I was sorry that I said it. Anyway, they got a they took me on this open boat over to the carrier, and when I got there, I was soaked. I was frozen, being cold. It was in Japan. It's just as cold as it is here. The next day or two, they let us go into Tokyo, and we went to the Emperor's Palace. We got to see it from the outside. They wouldn't let us inside. It's a great big wall, and you can see a house on top. And they said it was the Emperor's Palace, so I had to take their word for it. But we noticed people along the way trying to sell stuff because they didn't have any food. They were very short on food. And we built the fires. They have sticks coming in to a point, and then they had a fire in the middle, and they tried to keep warm that way by pushing the sticks in, and they would burn their fires. I thought that was a very strange way. Instead of having it all there and getting all the heat at once, they had just a little heat for a long time. We went back to Sasebo, who was on this destroyer, and we got to Sasebo, and I think we got dysentery. They had us isolated. About half the ship was sick with dysentery. We went over to China. We were Sing Sao or something like that. Anyway, uh, it was the emperor's, the Chinese emperor's, it was their summer palace. It's where they spent their summers. It was supposed to be cooler or something. I don't know. Anyway, we got there and they wouldn't let us off the ship. They never did give us a reason, but we figured that they just didn't want us to get uh, lost or attacked, or they just didn't want us to get into trouble. And it's just possible that we would. We have a way of getting into problems. We were only there 3 or 4 days, and went back to Sasebo, Japan, and I got homesick, and I had enough points in those days. You could be uh, if you were overseas more than 18 months, you could get leave. It let you go back to the states you could get 30 days leave. I went to see the captain and told him I'd like to go home. And he says, "Well, I'll tell you, we're going to make a tour of the world. We're going to go halfway around the world to go back home. If you want to stay with us." And I says, "Oh, I'd like to go home." So he signed the papers, and I got on a troop ship, and they took me back to Seattle, Washington, and just landed there on 1st of February. I think it took me about a week to get my papers and put me on leave, and then I catch a train back to St. Louis. When I got home, I everybody treated me good. Glad to see me. All my friends got back. All the people that guys I used to run with uh, before I went in. I was the only one that went in the Navy, and the rest of them went in the Army. Three of them went to Europe, and one of them was in the Battle of the Bulge. They all made it back all right. Yeah, nobody nobody was captured or. And then I went back to Chicago to the Great Lakes. I was there for about a week or so, and they put me back on a train, and I went back to California to San Francisco, and they put me on a bus, took me to a place called Camp Shoemaker, and I was there when my dad got sick, and my mother got the emergency leave, and I came home. I was home about a month. My dad didn't get any better, and I was supposed to go back, and they told me that I should come up, and they would discharge me on May the 13th. I was discharged from the Navy, just 2 days short of 2 years. My father, he got sick, and he had cirrhosis of the liver. We don't know how he got it. Uh, he was in the hospital for about 2 months, 3 months. She was his nurse. I stayed up at night, Dad taking care of him at night, and she was a nice nurse. And she tripped over me when I was stretched out, well, trying to get some sleep, and that's how I met your grandma. I enjoyed my time in the Navy. I learned a lot, seen a lot. I was going to sign over in the Navy until my father died. I thought I'd get back on a ship going around the world. That appealed to me. Yeah, it was a real adventure. I thought for 2 years in my life, I had all the places I went and all the things that I did. And then I married that pretty girl over there.
Everyone lived happily ever after, I guess.
Yeah, and you know the story from there.
I have from